exact same strategies that you'll see in my session are just as applicable in the physical classroom when we do eventually someday get back there. So all of my contact information, now Google is going off, oh, for Pete's sake. Hey, Google, stop. All of my contact information is across the bottom of the screen, and then also is included here. And everything we're looking at today is also available on my website, which is teachbeyondthedesk.com, and it's divided into sections. Worksheet busters are strategies that start with just a worksheet and then turn that worksheet into a really fun hands-on activity. Homework busters use in-class grading strategies that take the process of like grading in class from this passive experience into an active, meaningful learning experience. Lecture busters are designed to be checks for understanding, either as exit tickets or midway through lectures. I have a small number of content-specific ideas, but then an area that may be of interest in my blog, I've been blogging the real life of being a 6th grade teacher doing e-learning, so I have posts about that, but then specifically this blog post about virtual busters has a single post with all the links that we will cover in our session today. So if I run out of time and don't get to something, or if people want to go look at things later, it would all be right here in the virtual busters post on my website. So hopefully that's a handy dandy way to access things later. And I do believe in participation. So those of you who have been sitting around all day, I'm sorry, this is kind of the start of my workday today. So you get my brand new energy. And if you're willing, there are things for us to do. So why Boredom Busters? Because I live obviously in the very real world. You've witnessed that today. I know that our time and money and materials can only stretch so far. And there are times that we can create a really engaging hands-on learning experience for our students, and we download these cute Teachers Pay Teachers activities, and we cut everything out and it's laminated, and maybe we decorate the room, but I mean, let's face it, we can't do that for everything. And I call it the Thursday problem. You know how like Monday and Tuesday you have your superstar lessons, and by the time you get to Thursday in your lesson plans, it says like page 147. And that's it, you've got nothing left. So Boredom Busters are designed to be low or no prep, low or no materials activities that leverage curiosity and novelty to increase buy-in, engagement, and depth. We know that novelty is extremely valuable as a learning tool for the brain, that when the brain experiences something novel, it's already aroused and it's already interested, and that's a good thing for a good condition to create for memorable and lasting learning. But this is an important note that I do want to offer before I move any further. I'm not magic, and none of these strategies I will offer are magic. In fact, if you're really looking to revolutionize your classroom, if you're really looking to do awesome, magical things in your classroom, you as the educator in your classroom are the magic. So anything I show today is just a spark, just a launching off point. And if you see something today and you're like, well, I would like that if, or maybe that would work, but then change them, adapt them, mold them, and make them what you need it to be to work in your classroom setting. All of the busters selected for today's session are designed to encourage active engagement and social learning here virtually. And then when we do someday return to our physical classrooms, these will still allow for that active engagement and social learning while maintaining what we anticipate maybe being the social distancing expectations. I'm not a medical expert. I can't foretell exactly what we will look at, especially here in the US when we do finally go back. But we kind of have reason to believe students will need to be maybe 6 feet apart. Our classrooms will need to be spaced out a little bit. We'll limit physical contact. So we're trying to respect those expectations when we do return to our classrooms. So the first one I'll show you is called Alphabet Soup. You would give students a letter, and then they would come up with a term that starts with that letter and explain that term's connection to the lesson. And the really powerful way to use this is give a letter that doesn't come from a term they covered in the lesson, not a vocabulary word, instead something seemingly disconnected, so that they can't just regurgitate something from their textbook or notes, that instead they have to actually make their own meaningful connections. So I do on the website have a printable version. This is something that you could give to students in PDF form, but this is as easy to do in like any kind of text box. Anything students would do to turn and work digitally, they could type an answer to this or use a discussion board. If you are working with students live, one really cool twist to this is if a student has already given a term, it's not allowed to be used again. So if they're a little later getting their term in, then they've got to really think that much harder to come up with a new unique term that starts with that number. So here are some possible applications. We could come up with a term that relates to the chapter we just read, solving this kind of math problem, a skill we just learned, or that would help someone understand today's topic. And because I believe in audience participation, we're going to try it out and we'll use our little chat box. So you're going to identify and explain a term starting with the letter M that relates to teaching remotely. And we'll use the chat box for that. So I'll try to keep my eye here on the chat box too. So a term starts with the letter M and explain how it relates to teaching remotely. And I'm going to go minimized here so I can see the chat. Yeah, messaging, using the chat box to communicate. Mobile device, multitasking, amen to that, right? So if we think about the application in the classroom setting, just how much conversation is generated out of the sharing of these terms, and students are having to create meaning instead of just regurgitating something from the notes, which we know does take the learning deeper and make it more meaningful. Later, as a recall device, you can remind the students, hey, remember when we used the letter M? And then they've got a hook in that memory in their brain to help them start to retrieve the information from the day. We know in current ed research the importance of retrieval practice, and the more often we have students retrieving the information they've learned, the more lasting that learning is. So this is a simple retrieval device too. All right, the next is junk drawer, which is the same concept, but instead of giving them a letter, you give them a seemingly random object and have them explain how that object would be connected to the content you covered for the day. On my website, I have a whole list of printable junk drawer cards available, but since we're teaching remotely right now, you've got the wealth of Google Images, so you could pick anything. But the point is to pick something that doesn't have an intentional connection to your content, something instead just seemingly ordinary and random, and look at how it might be connected. Again, I do have a printable option available on the website, but this is as simple as typing out an explanation. So really there's no fancy form needed in our virtual settings. So we could do how this item relates to, say, the central idea or the geography of Central America or probability or the laws of motion. And we're gonna try it out again. I have my random object is this lamp. So explain how this lamp relates to being a teacher during a global pandemic. And again, I'm going to minimize so I can watch the chat box and participate too. So how does this lamp relate to being a teacher during a global pandemic? Ideas, yes, the light bulb. Lighting up new ways of teaching. Ooh, I really like that. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but this light is currently off and the cord is cut off. And I found myself feeling that way a little every now and then lately, you know, where we've given our ideas and man, we are pouring ourselves out, and every now and then it's like the light won't come on and I'm not even plugged in. My brain is just kind of muted for a little while. Ooh, guiding in the midst of darkness or the unknown. Wow, you guys are like poetic. This is awesome. So you can see that this is something that your students would not have already in their notes. They aren't going to have in their notes, how does a lamp relate to teaching in a global pandemic? This is something they're going to have to create their own connection out of, which makes it extremely powerful and lasting in their memory. Next is movie night, and this one is super, super easy to do. Students just name a movie title, an existing movie, and explain how it relates to the content of the lesson. So again, there's a fancy printable available on the website, but if they can type a response or say it out loud, then you're good to go. So they could identify a movie title that relates to a chapter you just read, or solving that kind of problem in math, or a skill they just learned, or helping someone understand today's topic. And y'all, we really don't need to try this one out together, because if we're honest, every disaster movie ever created is what we're living right now. By the time the Murder Hornets came out, someone was like, what chapter of the Hunger Games are we in? So this is, we're just living it. We don't need to name them. In fact, I'm a little afraid to. It's a little like someone knock on wood just in case. So the next one is Meme Me, and this one I'd already created, it's in the book, but now that we're teaching virtually, this is the perfect time to deploy this strategy. So students would pick or create a meme that relates to the content of the lesson. And y'all, since our students are learning remotely, they have access to these meme generators online, and if you don't know what a meme is, I guarantee your students do. And that's when there's a picture with like captions on it that says something funny in kind of a snarky way, and memes are super common, and they are the language our students speak. So they could create a meme that the character of our book would have posted after this plot event, or that a historical figure would have posted in response to a current event. You know, what would George Washington Carver have to say about COVID-19? Represent your mastery of today's topic. We're not going to try this one out together simply for the sake of time. I only get this little 20-minute window with you, but I do just have one word of caution. If you are using online meme generators, be aware of your student's age. Online meme generators are super easy to use, and I've been asked to use them in PD I've attended before, even, you know, as just a little warm-up activity. But because they're on the internet, some of the images that are included in a lot of those meme generators might not be appropriate for younger audiences. If you're working with younger students, you might pre-select some images and use Google Slides, for example, to have them put text over top of it, or find another way to be able to do this in a slightly more controlled environment. I have middle schoolers. You know, if I put them on a meme generator, most of them are seeing worse than that on a regular basis. But if I were a little nervous, then again, there are Google Slides templates for meme creation that are out there. If you just Google Slides meme generator, there's tons. So the next one, and I do apologize that I'm speaking really fast, but I'm trying to put a lot in our 20 minutes, is 6 degrees of separation. This came from the idea of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where everyone is connected to the actor Kevin Bacon in 6 degrees or less. And the purpose of this activity is to make connections between pieces of content. And it's born out of that problem we encounter where students don't see one piece of content in its relationship in the continuum of learning. They see it in isolation. And it doesn't matter how much we say, look, this is, you know, chapter 2, it comes after chapter 1, it's building on chapter 1. Our students just don't see it that way. And they'll be like, wait, we still need to know that? And that's the dreaded line that we hear. So this is designed to help students make connections between those pieces of content. You can pick 2 terms, people, ideas, or facts that should be connected, or you can pick 2 seemingly disconnected things and just see what students can come up with to connect those. So for example, they could connect a term from last chapter to a new one from today, a previous skill to a new one, a person to a location or event, 2 seemingly unrelated terms, or something that would be really cool to do just in the current events we are living would be to find a curricular connection between what they're covering in class, their actual class content with you, and what's going on in the current events, because there are lots of really interesting connections happening right now. So it's a good way to bring their attention to those connections. So we are going to try it super fast. How could you use 6 degrees of separation with your current unit of study? So instead of us making a connection, we're actually just brainstorming how we could use 6 degrees of separation with our current unit of study. My students are doing a graphic novel study of Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. And we're doing the hero's journey plot structure. So we very easily could make connections between current events now, what it is to live in these like radical times where, you know, our whole setting has been changed with Percy, who found himself in a very different setting. So any ideas there in our chat? How could you use 6 degrees of separation with your current unit of study? And I don't do quiet waiting well, so I'm trying to exhibit self-control. My 6th grade son was working on a project for his social studies class, and he was supposed to research one country in South America, and he's researching Brazil. And so he was looking at tourist attractions in Brazil, and he said, "Mom, I'm reading about these tourist attractions online, but they all say they're closed due to COVID-19. And so we got to talking about the global nature of this pandemic and how the very same restrictions he's living here in Indiana exist in other countries too. So we were able to make a connection between his study of Brazil with the current conditions he's living in Indiana. And we were talking about our governor just lifted our stay-at-home order. And so then that got us to talking about, well, what other places have been released? What other places are still locked down? So you could use your content to engage students in good connection with their current events. But again, remember, this could be connecting two pieces of study. So what I'll do is pop up here in my presentation, pop back here to the possible connections. One really powerful way to use this is to think of a connection students should be making. So if you think about the content you teach, especially something like math where skills build on each other, and you're thinking, okay, in order to solve this kind of problem, they really need to know how to do this. They need to use this skill we covered a chapter or two ago. And the students just might not have that connection clear in their head. So you could say, well, what does the distributive property have to do with quadratic equations or something like that, and ask students to then generate the connection between those curricular ideas. All right, so next is strike a pose. This one is a super popular activity from my book, and the whole purpose was we all do multiple choice problems at some point, right? I mean, they're built into our textbook series, they're part of our assessment process. We cover multiple choice questions. But typically when we go over multiple choice questions, we're just going over letters, A, B, C, D. So this is a way to get students up and moving while showing their answer to a multiple choice question. But the challenge was my usual one has students physically getting up and moving, and now I teach with my students in Zoom where I see them from about the clavicle up. So I needed to adjust the image, the poses that we usually use, and pick ones that work here in this little box that I now see my students in. So I changed the poses where now for their answer, if they're answering letter A, they can do this, B this, C this, and D they turn and do the running man. So I can see what letter they are picking by how they move their body. The purpose of this, again, is to get students physically engaged in the content. Any of you who have taught classes online using Zoom or Meet right now, you've seen how disconnected students can get, especially if their camera is turned off. And I have seen things on the internet about requiring students to have their camera on. I don't. Some of my shyer students are not comfortable being on camera with their classmates. And some of my students live in challenging home circumstances, and they really don't want the camera turned on, so that's fine. But I notice then I'm not as physically connected with my students. They're not as physically connected with the learning sometimes. So this activity lets them get a little engaged. I have found even my students that usually have their camera turned off are comfortable turning it on as briefly to be able to go and then turn it back off. They've been fine with that, so we haven't had any issues. This image is on the blog on the website too, in case you're wanting to grab it. So you could use this for any multiple choice question. Often we have these already prepared for us as part of our textbook series or reviewing tests. It's easy to use on the fly too. If you have the image and you have multiple choice questions, boom, there you go. You've got an interesting, engaging activity. And one of the really nice things about doing this, students will strike their pose and then notice what everyone else is doing and maybe subtly change if they realize they're wrong. And that's okay. That lets them kind of self-check and correct. And then we're watching them to know, oh, I need to follow up with James later. He was hesitant on this, so James is going to need some follow-up. Okay. So we're still getting the kind of feedback we need to guide our instruction and support our students. And they have the safety of knowing, hey, if I'm wrong, I can hesitate a split second or watch everybody and change, and then I feel safe. So it's a really effective strategy. We were going to try it, but I'm really low on time. So if we don't mind, we will skip the try it out and move on to the next one, because I really wanted to show you a couple that you can use later when we are eventually back in our physical classrooms. Now, everything we've covered so far works just as well physically in our classrooms as it does virtually. But I wanted to show you some that don't necessarily go both ways. They aren't as good virtually, but they're super effective physically. So hopefully when we return to our physical classrooms, these will be effective strategies. So remember, fun is a very powerful tool to leverage in learning. If students are having fun, their brains are in the right condition to be able to learn. We know if they're feeling stressed or disinterested, that they're thinking from the back part of their brain that is much more survival mechanisms. They're not actively mentally engaged. However, fun has an even more important purpose when we do eventually return to our classrooms, because we have the advantage of starting virtual learning now with students we've had all school year. So we've already established our classroom climate, we've already built that relationship with them. It's quite possible in the fall, we will be in disrupted times with students who are brand new to us and brand new to our classrooms. So we've got to be intentional about creating positive, safe, classroom climate with our students, and fun in learning is a very good way to do that. So very quickly, here's the true stand up and move version of the strike a pose. This will let students be physically active in their learning without leaving their desk space, so that they can physically move while learning without necessarily getting into someone else's space, which is going to be really important with social distancing. And then finally, very briefly, I'll explain paper airplanes. And I'm going to give you like the 45-second edition. So here we go. I'm talking fast. Keep up. So paper airplanes, everyone gets a worksheet. They put their name at the top. They answer the first problem, stand up, fold it into a paper airplane, and launch it. Now, I'm banking on the idea here that from what we know right now, we don't think the virus spreads very much on paper surfaces, and students won't be in physical contact, but I'm assuming it will be safe for them to touch paper. If it turns out that that's not the case, then whatever, we'll like earmark this one for later when we're not contagious. And then they grab another airplane, they answer number 2, throw it, repeat, and when it's done, they get their own original one back and evaluate all the answers that have been contributed on it. They then have to decide if those answers are right or wrong and provide evidence to support or refute the answers they see, which drives the learning far deeper than the original worksheet. Some possible applications. You can do this with a worksheet, like I said, one question at a time. You can do open-ended questions where everyone starts with a different question. They write their response, and then when they launch it, they see the responses of their classmates and add their own thoughts, and they're answering all these different questions around the room. So they're having discussion with each other without physically being in each other's space. And you can do this with multi-step problems in math, for example. When they receive a paper and it's got the started version someone else did, they then have to continue the problem that way. Again, the objective here is to drive that learning deeper than just a basic worksheet would have done. So I do have an article available through the Association for Middle Level Education. It's on their website. I have multiple webinars available through them as well. My book is available through Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and the Kindle edition has been just $2.99. Through the whole COVID-19 crisis, and as long as it's still at that cost, it's a super affordable way to get it. I've never seen it priced that low, so you may want to jump on that. And everything's available on the website, so there's my contact information. I'm happy to field any questions or comments at this time.